I need you to understand something before I continue. What we heard in Kraken Mare was not a sound. It was an answer. What I'm about to describe was never supposed to leave the archives of the European Space Agency. My name is Dr. Marcus Wren, and for 17 months, I served as the lead acoustic engineer aboard the Dragonfly 2 mission to Titan. This testimony exists because I refuse to let them bury what we heard beneath layers of classified documentation and bureaucratic silence. It started with a routine hydrophone deployment on Sol 247. We'd positioned our craft at the northern edge of Kraken Mare, Saturn's largest moon, hosting a methane sea larger than the Caspian. The mission parameters were straightforward. Drop the acoustic array to 180 meters, measure liquid density variations, map the lakebed topology. Standard planetary science. Nothing that should have changed everything we thought we knew about this moon. The hydrophone array, designated KM Alpha 7, consisted of 12 piezoelectric sensors rated for temperatures down to minus 179 degrees Celsius. Each unit could detect pressure variations as subtle as 0.00001 pascals. We'd tested them extensively in liquid nitrogen chambers back on Earth, run thousands of simulations accounting for Titan's thick nitrogen atmosphere and its peculiar hydrocarbon chemistry. The equipment was flawless. Every component had been triple-checked before launch. At 14:23 UTC on deployment day, the array reached target depth. I was monitoring the data stream from the main lab module, drinking recycled coffee that tasted like metal when the first anomaly appeared on my screens. A rhythmic pulse at 37 Hz, rising and falling in a pattern that didn't match any known geological process or fluid dynamics model in our database. My immediate thought was equipment malfunction, perhaps ice crystals forming on the sensor membranes, or interference from our own propulsion systems. But when I ran the full diagnostic suite, every component reported nominal function, temperature reading stable, power draw consistent, signal integrity at 99.7%. The pulse continued for 6 minutes and 42 seconds. Then it stopped with an abruptness that made my skin prickle despite the controlled environment of the hab. I should have logged it as an unexplained acoustic event and moved on to the scheduled survey pattern. Instead, something in the data's structure made me uneasy. I increased the array's gain sensitivity by 15% and waited, watching the spectrogram display for any recurrence. What came next arrived at 2:17 UTC the following morning. I'd fallen asleep at my station, the background hiss of atmospheric processors, and the gentle hum of the reactor my only company. The alert woke me, multiple sensors detecting coordinated activity across different frequency bands. This wasn't a single pulse anymore. This was layered, complex, structured in ways that made my pulse accelerate. I pulled up the full spectrogram and felt something cold settle in my chest, spreading through my ribs like frost. The frequencies formed patterns, not random, not geological, not anything our models predicted, patterns that repeated with subtle variations, like phrases in an unknown syntax being tested and refined. The fundamental frequency hovered around 52 Hz, with harmonics extending up to 340 Hz in precise mathematical relationships. But it was the timing that stopped my breath. The intervals between signal clusters matched prime number sequences. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11 seconds of silence. Then the patterns would resume with slightly altered parameters. I recorded everything on isolated drives, bypassing the main mission database. 4 hours and 16 minutes of continuous transmission. The signals exhibited characteristics I'd only seen in biological vocalizations: frequency modulation, amplitude variation, repetitive motifs with deliberate alteration, and what appeared to be error correction. Whatever was generating these sounds was doing so with clear intention and intelligence. By Sol 250, I'd analyzed 127 distinct pattern variations. Some repeated frequently, like words in common usage. Others appeared only once, perhaps proper nouns or technical terminology we couldn't understand. I began constructing a crude lexicon, mapping sound patterns to possible semantic categories based on context and frequency of appearance. The work consumed me completely. I stopped attending the daily crew briefings. I ate meal rations at my station, barely tasting the reconstituted proteins. Commander Park expressed serious concern about my psychological state and threatened mandatory rest periods, but I couldn't make her understand the magnitude of what we'd discovered. We weren't alone on this moon. Something intelligent lived in those methane seas. The breakthrough came on Sol 256. During a particularly strong transmission window, I'd written an algorithm to identify syntactic structure, searching for grammatical rules governing how the patterns combined and evolved. At 1933 UTC, the program flagged something extraordinary. A sequence that had appeared in 17 different transmissions, always in the same position relative to other patterns, always with the same harmonic structure. A grammatical marker, perhaps, or a designation, a name for something or someone. I played it back through the speakers, amplified and filtered. The sound that filled the lab wasn't like anything terrestrial. It resonated in a way that made my jawbone ache and my teeth vibrate, as if the frequencies were somehow tuned to human anatomy despite originating from something utterly alien. And beneath the main signal, barely registering on our equipment, I detected something I'd missed in the raw data: subsonic components at 12 Hz, right at the threshold of human perception. The kind of frequency that triggers instinctive dread in mammals. The frequency range where human organs begin to resonate sympathetically. That night, I had the first dream. I was floating in the methane sea, the perpetual orange haze of Titan's atmosphere, filtering distant sunlight to a dim, alien twilight. Shapes moved in the deep below me, vast and geometrically wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. They weren't swimming. They were unfolding, extending through dimensions I couldn't process with my three-dimensional mind. And they were singing the patterns I'd recorded, but now I could understand them. They were describing us, cataloging us, preparing for us. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth and the absolute certainty that the transmissions weren't random biological sounds. They were directed, aimed at our hydrophone array, at us. On Sol 261, everything changed. The mission parameters were altered without warning. ESA command transmitted new instructions via priority channel. Cease all hydrophone operations immediately. Retrieve the array. Prepare for early departure from Kraken Mare. No explanation provided, no discussion permitted, just immediate compliance required. Commander Park looked relieved when she read the orders. The rest of the crew seemed eager to move on to the Southern Hemisphere mapping sites, away from whatever had unsettled me so deeply. I couldn't leave, not yet, not without knowing if they would respond to intentional contact. That night, while the crew slept in their quarters, I accessed the primary control systems using my engineering override codes and initiated one final deployment. I had to know if they were truly trying to communicate. Using the hydrophone array in reverse mode, I could generate acoustic signals in the liquid methane. I took the most frequently repeated pattern from the transmissions, the one I thought might be a greeting or identifier, and played it back into Kraken Mare at 300 watts output power. The response was immediate and overwhelming, not just one source but hundreds, thousands. The entire lake came alive with coordinated signals that overwhelmed our recording equipment, maxing out every sensor in the array simultaneously. The patterns cascaded through frequencies we could barely detect, creating harmonics that made the hull of our craft vibrate with sympathetic resonance. I could feel it in my bones, in my skull, as if the sound was trying to reach inside me. And within the chaos of overlapping transmissions, I heard structure emerging rapidly. They were answering in patterns that mirrored human speech rhythms, as if learning our acoustic nature from the simple signal I'd sent, adapting to us, trying to bridge the gap. Then came the words, not in English, not in any human language, but unmistakably linguistic. Phonemes that shouldn't exist, formed by something with no vocal cords, no lungs, no biological apparatus I could comprehend. Yet somehow, terrifyingly, they were producing sounds that approximated human communication with increasing accuracy, testing us, studying us through the medium of vibration and pressure waves. Each iteration came closer to something recognizable. I shut down the transmission in panic and initiated emergency retrieval of the array. My hands shook violently as I purged the audio files from the primary systems, copying everything to isolated storage drives that I could keep hidden. The sounds continued for another 3 hours and 7 minutes, gradually diminishing in intensity, but never quite stopping. Even now, at reduced volume, barely registering on our passive sensors, something in Kraken Mare was still calling out, still trying to reach us. Commander Park found me in the lab at 6:40 UTC, surrounded by printouts of spectrograms and half-finished mathematical models I'd been obsessively constructing. She didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway with an expression that told me she knew exactly what I'd done. The mission logs would show my unauthorized transmission. There would be consequences, disciplinary action, possibly criminal charges for violating protocols. But that's not why I'm recording this testimony. I'm recording it because of what I found in the final analysis, the piece of data I haven't told anyone, the truth that keeps me awake during the 7-month journey back to Earth, the truth that made me smuggle these drives aboard despite the security screening. Among the hundreds of responding signals, one was different. It didn't originate from Kraken Mare. The triangulation data placed its source 847 kilometers to the southeast, deep in the southern polar region where no missions had ventured. Another lake, or something else entirely, something larger. And this signal wasn't trying to communicate. It was transmitting coordinates, spatial data, instructions being broadcast continuously on multiple frequency bands. I've decoded enough to know they describe locations on Earth, cities, 16 of them, Tokyo, New York, London, São Paulo, and the timestamps embedded in the signal structure suggest these transmissions have been ongoing for at least 4 decades. Long before we sent the first probe to Titan in the early 21st century, they've been calling to something, and now I fear that something has been listening, perhaps even responding in ways we haven't recognized, perhaps already moving. ESA will confiscate these drives when we dock at the orbital station. They'll classify everything under national security protocols, discredit my findings as stress-induced delusion, possibly mandate psychiatric evaluation and career termination. That's fine. I accepted that outcome when I made the unauthorized transmission. I needed to get this out while I still could, while the data still exists. Someone needs to know what's waiting in those methane seas, what's been singing in the dark since before we evolved the ability to hear. Someone needs to be ready, because the last transmission I recorded, the one that came through at 23:59 UTC on Sol 265 as we lifted off from Titan's surface and began our ascent to orbit, wasn't in their language anymore. It was in ours. 3 words, repeated 17 times with perfect pronunciation, each iteration slightly clearer than the last, each one more human. We are arriving. The acoustic signature matches human vocal patterns exactly, down to the regional accent markers and phonetic microstructures. as if something down there has finally learned to speak in a way we cannot ignore or dismiss. And if the coordinates mean what I think they mean, if those 16 cities represent landing sites or contact zones, then we've already given them our address. We've already invited them home. We sent out our greeting, and they're accepting the invitation. The drives are sealed in radiation-shielded containers. The data is preserved and redundantly backed up, and somewhere in the perpetual twilight of Saturn's largest moon, something waits in the liquid dark, perfecting its voice, counting down to emergence, preparing for a journey across 1.2 billion kilometers of space. This testimony exists because someone needs to know, because someone needs to be ready for when the signals stop coming from Titan and start coming from much, much closer, from orbit, from the surface, from inside. I just hope we're listening. I hope someone is preparing, because in approximately 8 months, if I've calculated their transmission intervals correctly, those voices will go silent, and that silence will be the most terrifying sound of all.